All right, so I made a video that was basically this exact same video last week where I used ESPN's Playoff Machine and I, just checked and saw who I have projecting to make the playoffs from here on out. So the way you do it is you just, there's every game, you predict who you think is going to win every single game and see what it spits out. And it's a little bit flawed because obviously, at the beginning of the season, whoever you think is the best team in football, you would have going 17-0 with this logic, which of course does not happen. You lose games even when you're the better team, and even when you even match up better, because obviously I factored that into the account. Still, it doesn't always work out that way. And the bad teams are going to lose every single game and that kind of stuff. But it's still kind of a fun exercise, so I figured let's give it another go this week because I had fun doing it last week. Because I have changed some things. Things have been different. So first, what I'm going to do is just show you who I picked for every single game. I'm obviously not going to go through every single one of these games and explain why, but just if you're curious as to why I picked, why one team is in one spot, these are the teams that I predicted winning for each matchup. So if you're confused, you can go back and look here. So let's start off with the AFC. And yes, you see at the top of the screen, that is, you're not misreading it. I have the Patriots projected to win the AFC, being the number one seed in the AFC. Now, here's where things get a little bit tricky. Notice that both Baltimore and Kansas City I have projected at 13-4 as well, so there's a three-way tie at 13-4. Last week, I actually had Baltimore at 14-3, but I kind of feel a little bit better about the Packers now and a little bit worse about the Ravens now, so I decided to flip that game and give the Packers the win, whereas the week before I had the Ravens winning, so that's part of why it's different. Also, I should mention, well, yes, I did this last week. I didn't pay attention to my picks last week. I just did it all over again, and I kind of forgot who I picked in certain games, which I think is good. I didn't want to say, well, I picked it that week, so I'm going to keep it that way. No, I wanted to go in with a completely open mind. But a real important detail is that New England plays Buffalo twice. I have them beating Buffalo twice, but again, this is just because I think, New England has like a 55% chance to win both times. That doesn't necessarily mean that I think they actually will win both times. They'll probably lose a game somewhere in here. Same thing with, like Kansas City and Baltimore. However, I do think there is a very real chance that New England does end up as the number one seed in the AFC. I think that's absolutely possible. And kind of a couple of those early losses really loom large now for New England. Going further down, so yeah, Baltimore and Kansas City, I do have winning a lot of games. Same thing with Tennessee, who I know they're banged up, but their schedule is just easy. So those are the four division winners that I have projected. And then for the wild cards, you have Buffalo, who, Buffalo's still very good. The Tre'Davious White injury obviously hurts them, but that's where I have them lined up. And then for number 6, okay, so you see the Raiders, you see their record is wrong. I forgot to include one game. I did have them, and I ended up having them beating the Colts, so they should be 10-7, so they would still have the 6th seed. Everything would be the same. I just accidentally forgot to click that one. But yeah, the Raiders, who I did not have as a playoff team last week, are now in the playoffs, and then the Cincinnati Bengals at 9-8, they squeak in at the 7th seed, but there is just so much teams that could end up here. And again, a lot of it is going to come down to just, who wins the games you're supposed to win. This is now all of the teams, so we'll go division by division. We'll start off at the top left quadrant. What's interesting about this, obviously I talked about the two playoff teams. Miami is only a game out according to this graphic. So Miami absolutely does have a chance to make the playoffs because of their relatively weak schedule. I could see them maybe squeaking in. Again, one of the issues with this is for a team like Miami, who I'm just not that high on, I don't think is that great. Part of it is they have to beat the bad teams too. Like we saw this with Philadelphia, where we're all saying, hey, their schedule is weak, they'll probably get in. We have to actually win those games as well. Also, the Jets suck, so they're 3-14. That checks out. Now to the AFC West, so bottom left. Again, talked about Kansas City, talked about Las Vegas. The Chargers, I do have a little bit lower. I mean, they were significantly lower than they were last week. I think last week they had the 2 seed. I just feel a little bit worse about them. That was a tough loss against Denver. Denver is still going to be one game behind. But those are still two teams that, a couple games go differently, they could end up in that, in a playoff spot. So those are two teams that absolutely have a chance to compete. Then moving over to the AFC North, the top right, kind of a similar thing where, Cincinnati does make it despite not being bold because they're the 7 seed. And then Cleveland is, again, just one game behind. And in the AFC South, you go over to Indianapolis, who, again, should be 8-9, not 8-8, but they're a team that they're right there in it. all those teams could potentially make the playoffs. That's really interesting how that's going to break down, and I wonder if it will be the Bengals and the Raiders, or if any of these other teams could squeak in. It's similar to last year, where we saw a couple teams that were kind of the clear front runners, but then we saw just a number of teams that were just competing for those last playoff spots, even on the last week of the season. Okay, now moving over to the NFC. So first we have, number 1 seed still is Arizona. They had a bye week, so I don't feel any differently about them. I had them at number 1 last week, so that checks out. But what's fascinating about a shift is, like I said, I have the Green Bay Packers now beating the Ravens, and in doing that, they're currently 14-3, meaning if Arizona just slips in one of those games that they have remaining, Green Bay could absolutely take the 1 seed. They have the tiebreaker. So that's super fascinating, and that'll be a very interesting thing to see how that plays out between those two teams. Even a team like Tampa Bay has a chance. Now, they're going to need some help, and they play Buffalo, who I have Buffalo beating Tampa Bay. It could go either way. So if Tampa Bay does run the table and go 14-3, they're another team that they have a chance. Things could work out, but they need some help. Dallas, I still think, is a very good team, even though they have been slipping a little bit. Them being the 4th seed, that checks out. And the Rams being the 5th seed also does check out. But keep in mind, that 5th seed and 6th seed, that's tied. I mean, that's pretty fascinating that I kind of had the Niners and the Rams ending up tied, which is not something we thought we would see just a few weeks ago. But then again, the 49ers did blow out the Rams. The Rams have just been struggling these past few weeks. They need to figure something out. And a 7 seed, I do have Minnesota squeaking in as the 7 seed at 9-8. Not the most impressive record, and actually you could argue there is a bit of a concern with them being, also, I mean, it's totally a Kirk Cousins thing to make the playoffs only, 1 game above 500. But what's very fascinating about this whole situation, I would say, is if you look over to the next, this is all of the teams. At this point, you see the teams that could potentially pass Minnesota. I still have Philadelphia, despite the fact that I don't think they're a fantastic team. I think that they are still rebuilding. I have them tied for a playoff spot, largely because you have the Vikings, who are, they're 9-8. That playoff spot is open. That 7 seed still is kind of open, even if San Francisco goes on a run, like I think that they could. So if the Vikings just slip up once, we've seen them lose games they shouldn't have lost before. They slip up once, now all of a sudden Philadelphia is currently in, and there's a couple of teams that have a chance. I mean, staying at the NFC East, it's really just Philadelphia, but you go down to the NFC West, I already have 3 playoff teams there, and even Seattle, like, if they win a couple of games because Russell Wilson is really good, it's not out of the question they can make the playoffs, but they would have to win a couple of games that I don't think that they will. The top right, the NFC North, again, it's kind of what we know, Chicago and Detroit, not very good, and then in the NFC South, so the other team that could, honestly, 2 teams that could find a way to squeak in there, New Orleans and Atlanta, if just they pull off a couple of upsets, they might be in the playoffs. So there still is a wide openness in the NFC, even though it feels like the Vikings should clearly be that 7th playoff team. That's not a guarantee that they'll get there. They've already lost too many games, and they still play the Rams and the Packers down the stretch. So it's not crazy to think that they could lose to the Bears in one of these games, right? They play the Bears twice. The Bears are a team that has given Cousins some trouble in the past. It's not out of the question that could happen. It's not out of the question the Steelers could beat them. But I still would probably say, if I'm a betting man, I'm still saying that I think the Vikings will be that 7th seed. So yeah, kind of a fun video to make. I'm not sure if I'm going to continue doing these the rest of the season, but I might. I mean, it's fascinating, and we're at the point in the year where I think it is relevant to look at schedules. Early on, I don't really pay much attention to it. I think that, we don't really know who's going to be good and who isn't. So looking at schedules week 2, that just, I don't know how relevant that is, but at this point, when we pretty much know, okay, who are the good teams, who are the bad teams, maybe we don't know exactly the order of who's the best team yet, but we know relatively a good amount about each of these teams. I think it can be more interesting to look at the schedules now and see how these things shake out. So what did you guys think? Let me know in the comments below. Always love hearing from you, and of course, as always, thanks for watching.